Lab 5, Spinal Reflexes and Reactions in Human. This experiment has three different objectives, as it has three different experiments. Number 1, objective for swallowing reflex experiment, to observe and understand the difference in ease between swallowing saliva consecutively versus swallowing water immediately after, thereby illustrating the reflexive nature of swallowing and its dependency on sensory input. Number 2, objective for reaction time to site experiment, to measure the time lapse between perceiving a visual stimulus and initiating a response using stopwatches in order to gain insights into how quickly our brains process visual information and signal our bodies to react. Number 3, objective for reaction time to touch experiment, to calculate the time delay between receiving a tactile stimulus on the foot and responding by stopping a stopwatch in order to determine the speed at which nerve impulses travel from the point of stimulation to the brain and back, thus elucidating neural conduction velocity. Overall introduction. Have you ever noticed how quickly your body moves without you even thinking about it? Like when you touch something really hot and instantly pull your hand away? Or when you catch a flying ball towards you without consciously planning to do so? These lightning fast reactions are thanks to our body's incredible reflexes, automatic involuntary responses that help keep us safe and functioning smoothly in our daily lives. In these experiments, we are setting out to explore just how amazing our body's reflexes are and how fast we react to different things we see or feel. By understanding these involuntary actions better, we can learn more about how our bodies work and even how to keep them healthy. Throughout our journey, we will be doing simple tests to see how quickly we swallow, how fast we react when we see something happening, and how long it takes for us to respond when we feel a touch. These tests may seem straightforward, but they will reveal a lot about the incredible abilities of our nervous system, the network of nerves that carries messages between our brain and the rest of our body.
Now I will be explaining the material and method used in these experiments. For experiment 5.1, swallowing reflex, first swallow saliva in your mouth cavity. Next, immediately try to swallow again. You will find it difficult to swallow. Next, drink a glass of water and swallow it. You will find that you have no difficulty swallowing in rapid succession. Next, explain the differences between the two. For experiment 5.2, both the experimenter and subject should have stopwatch each. Start the stopwatch simultaneously. Next, the experimenter should stop the stopwatch and the subject should follow as soon as they see this. Next, measure the time lapse between the experimenter and subject. Repeat this process 10 times and calculate the average reaction time. For experiment 5.3, both the experimenter and subject should have a stopwatch each. Start the stopwatch simultaneously. The subject should then close their eyes. The experimenter will press their foot onto the subjects and simultaneously stop their watch. The subject then needs to stop their stopwatch too when they feel the touch. Repeat this 10 times and calculate the average reaction time.
Now, on to discussion. Experiment 5.1 was conducted to investigate involuntary action of human by swallowing. This experiment was conducted 2 times by a subject. For the first time, the subject was required to swallow his saliva in a rapid succession. It is found out that the subject is unable to do so. For the second time, the subject was required to swallow liquid in the form of a drink in a rapid succession. This was successfully carried out. In daily life, saliva is swallowed without having to intentionally swallow it. Swallowing is an action done in response to stimuli, for the first trial being saliva. When the saliva is swallowed, there is no more stimuli, causing difficulty to swallow. For the second trial, the stimuli is replaced in the form of liquid, allowing the subject to swallow repeatedly until the stimuli runs out. Experiment 5.2 was conducted to study the average reaction time of subject to site. In this experiment, both experimenter and subject will hold a stopwatch, in which they will both start the stopwatch simultaneously, and when the experimenter stops the stopwatch, the subject needs to stop his immediately. This experiment was conducted 10 times, in which the time lapse for each trial were recorded. It was found out that the average reaction time of the subject to site was 0.197 seconds. The stimuli, experimenter's stopwatch stopping is seen by the eye, in which the information is sent to the cerebellum, where the appropriate motor response is sent to the central nervous system to finger muscles, where the finger is stimulated to press the stop button. This reflex is a voluntary action which involves multisynaptic reflex. Experiment 5.3 was conducted to study average reaction time of subject to touch. In this experiment, both experimenter and subject will hold a stopwatch, in which they will both start the stopwatch simultaneously. The subject is required to close his eyes. Then, the experimenter is required to step on the feet of the subject at random, and the subject must stop the stopwatch immediately as he feels the touch on his feet. This experiment was conducted 10 times, in which the time lapse for each trial were recorded. It was found out that the average reaction time of the subject to the touch was 0.287 seconds. Next, the length of nerve pathway between foot to finger was recorded, being 2.92 meters, in which it was divided by the reaction time to obtain speed of impulse transmission, being 10.17 meters per second. There are several errors that could occur in experiment 5.2 and 5.3. First, the time lapse for each trial having a large deviation. This is caused by the stopwatches not being started simultaneously, causing a slight time lag between experimenter's stopwatch with subject's stopwatch. This can be prevented by ensuring the stopwatch to start simultaneously each trial. Additionally, an error can occur, in which the time lapse between starting of experimenter's stopwatch with stopping it or stepping on the feet of the subject becomes too predictable, in which it greatly decreases the time lapse for each trial. This can be prevented by making sure each action is done at random to get accurate results. In this experiment, the involuntary action of human, in this case swallowing, was investigated. It was found out that swallowing is stimulated by stimuli, in this case liquid in mouth. Additionally, the average reaction time of subject to sight was also investigated. It was found out the average reaction time of sight for the subject was 0.197 seconds. Next, the average reaction time of subject to touch was also investigated, in which it was found out that the average reaction time of the subject to touch was 0.287 seconds, a little bit slower than the average reaction time to sight. The nerve pathway length was also recorded, being 2.92 meters, and the impulse transmission of the subject was 10.17 meters per second.